Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. I was informed, and it's on news media, that Pope Leo XIV called Buzz Aldrin on the 56th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. So this was on Sunday, this past Sunday, July the 11th. To commemorate the powerful historical event, Buzz had a particular role in this moon landing because just after landing, he took out bread and wine that he had received from communion privately, and he privately received communion, becoming the first person to celebrate the body and blood of Christ on the moon. Now, in this act, we see a kind of pious reflection of his own faith, but I want to talk about also how this event, how the Apollo 11 moon landing, is an event that should lead us to realize that God's mandate to Adam is one for all of us to this day. I want to talk about how we ought not underestimate the historical and theological weight of this event, that the landing was not just an American feat, even though it was a triumph of the human spirit, fueled by freedom, liberty, ingenuity, innovation, a desire to become all that we can be. And it's an echo of the original commission in Eden to fill the earth, to subdue it, to have dominion over all creation. I would like to go on from there to speak with Luke Lancaster. One of the doctrinal positions that separate the fractured body of Christ on earth is the issue of original sin. Many non-Catholics seek to argue that Adam and Eve's sin brought death into the world but did not pass anything else on to future generations. We need to properly understand this doctrine so that we can also understand the role of baptism for salvation. Often it becomes a question of why do some denominations not have baptism as a necessity for salvation. This is one of the reasons why a poor and therefore impoverished understanding of the doctrine of original sin and where we find it in the Scriptures. And then finally, we want to talk about the question of teleology with Jack O'Callahan, who recently published with Church Life Journal. This question of teleology, which is our final end, defines not only our creation, but how we ought to live. All this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Monday, July 21st. It's the Feast of St. Lawrence of Brindisi, Doctor of the Church. Today's news is brought to you by Visiting Angels, providing loving care and assistance for seniors in need. VisitingAngels.com. Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. has announced that it will no longer provide gender-transitional medical interventions and prescriptions for its patients. In a press release, the hospital cited escalating legal and regulatory risk as the reason for the policy change. This comes after the Justice Department sent dozens of subpoenas to doctors and clinics who perform transgender medical procedures on children. An agreement between the Trump administration and the lawyers for Kilmar Abrego Garcia has reportedly been reached. His attorneys are asking that any ruling to release him to be delayed by 30 days so they can evaluate their options. The legal team says that the Department of Justice isn't objecting to that request. The DOJ has said that Abrego Garcia would be picked up by ICE agents if he's released from custody. He's facing human smuggling charges in Tennessee. The Ivy League is taking on the Trump administration over frozen federal research funding.
A U.S. district judge in Massachusetts heard a case over Harvard's request that the funding freeze be declared unlawful. The Justice Department says anti-Semitism and DEI run Harvard's campus, so the school is not entitled to the $2.6 billion in federal funds. Harvard said the funding freeze puts the research of multiple fields at risk, and several other Ivy League universities, including Princeton and Yale, have filed court briefs in support of the school. I'm Chris Caraccio.
And actor Malcolm Jamal Warner of The Cosby Show is dead at the age of 54. Multiple reports say he died after drowning. Warner was known for his role as Theodore Huxtable in the hit sitcom. He had been recently hosting the podcast Not All Hood. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. In a little-known but profoundly symbolic gesture, Pope Paul VI watched the 1969 moon landing with breathless awe from the Vatican Observatory, no less. More than that, after Buzz Aldrin set foot on the lunar space, the Pope sent him a congratulatory message and later personally welcomed him to the Vatican, expressing the hopes of the Catholic Church for this momentous achievement of man. Aldrin, for his part, had done what he believed would sanctify the moment. Just after landing, he took out bread and wine and received communion privately, becoming the first person to celebrate the body and blood of Christ on another celestial body. And in this act, he unwittingly proclaimed the true theology of progress, that all human achievement must be rightly ordered towards divine glorification. Leo XIV called Aldrin on the 56th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. This was on Sunday, just this past Sunday, July 21st, 2025, to commemorate this powerful historic event. We must not underestimate the historical and theological weight of this event. The moon landing was not merely an American feat, even though that it was. It was a triumph of the human spirit, fueled by freedom, discipline, ingenuity. It was, in the words of Neil Armstrong, a small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. But more profoundly, it was also a holy echo of Eden's original commission. Fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion. Genesis 1:28. The lunar footprint was not merely a political win, it was a theological act of dominion and stewardship. Man, made imago Dei, was fulfilling the command of God to bring creation under wise, loving, ordered rule, not as a tyrant, but as a kind of priest-king. The Cold War's geopolitical tensions gave rise to a race that transcended terrestrial concerns. After the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik in 1957, Yuri Gagarin's spaceflight in 1961, the United States felt compelled to assert not only the political superiority but also human capability of the United States. John F. Kennedy, in a soaring address to Rice University in 1962, proclaimed, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade not because it is easy, but because it is hard." In doing so, Kennedy resurrected a sense of virtuous struggle, a refusal to stagnate, a determination to ascend quite literally. Each nation that participated in the space race expressed its soul in that endeavor. The USSR's launches, though stunning, were deeply tied to the state's atheistic ideology, a Gnostic rejection of the transcendent order. In contrast, America's effort, though politically motivated, was imbued with a kind of biblical grandeur. Scripture was quoted, psalms were read at launch pads, astronauts carried crucifixes and Bibles. It was at its best a national attempt to actualize the dominion of Genesis 1 and Psalm 8. You have given him dominion over the work of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, the moon and the stars which you have established. Psalm 8, 3-6. The moon landing was watched by an estimated 650 million people, then the largest simultaneous broadcast in human history. In that moment, humankind was united, however briefly, in awe. Children in Italy, Kenya, Japan, India, Malaysia, Singapore sat around radios and televisions asking questions not only about astronauts, but about God. Aldrin's communion was kept quiet at the time due to legal pressure, but its symbolism resonates louder than any press release. On the very dust of a dead celestial rock, the living bread was adored. It was not a triumph of man over God, but of man under God, a man lifted by grace and reason to steward creation even beyond his own atmosphere. Despite modern conspiracy theories that were born, frankly, of cynicism, ignorance, an allergy to excellence, or even just a disdain for government, the historical reality of the moon landing is unimpeachable. Its scientific data, engineering logistics, global witnesses, and successive missions testify to its authenticity. But deeper still, the meaning of the moon landing remains stubbornly luminous. In fact, we still don't have the technology to fabricate it in a Hollywood basement. Nay, I argue, it was not staged in Hollywood, it was orchestrated by means of heaven's design. Let's consider what made this possible. The United States, despite its moral inconsistencies, was then a nation marked by shared values, relative ubiquitous virtue, and civic unity. Families prayed, schools taught, churches were full. This created the internal coherence and moral order required to harness innovation. Freedom untethered from virtue is chaos. Freedom ordered by truth yields miracles. The Catechism teaches, freedom is the power rooted in reason and will to act or not to act, to do this or that, and so to perform deliberate actions on one's own responsibility. Paragraph 1731. The space race was a deliberate action of reason and will. It was freedom rightly ordered toward wonder. And you can contrast this with today's disunity. The modern mind has been poisoned and fragmented by a conflicted narrative. Marxist ideologies divide, deconstruct, and desecrate. Instead of striving toward the stars, we teach children to resent their past, deny their biology, despise work, and also abhor excellence. Man cannot build rockets while he is busy dismantling his own dignity and worth. We must, therefore, recover the foundational unity of purpose and virtue that once made such ventures possible. Man in the biblical tradition is not a cosmic accident, but a co-creator with God. The Church has long affirmed. John Paul II writes this. Through work, man not only transforms nature, adapting it to his own needs, he also achieves fulfillment as a human being, and indeed, in a sense, becomes more a human being. This is in Laborem Exercens, paragraph 9. The space race was not just a transformation of nature, it was man expanding the horizon of his own nature. This isn't hubris, it's holy stewardship. God gave man reason, imagination, the mandate to bring order out of chaos. The rocket scientist and the monk both participate in this creative enterprise, one through invention, the other through contemplation. But both, when rightly ordered, glorify God. Benedict XVI wrote, faith in the Creator is the beginning of the journey, but it does not end there. The Creator has called man into covenant and granted him participation in his creative wisdom. Apollo the 11th was, in a sense, a participation in that wisdom. The Church teaches that man's destiny is not merely to flourish biologically, but spiritually, communally, culturally. Vatican II affirms, man achieves his full identity only in the sincere gift of himself. The moon landing was not about an individual glory, but a communal act of giving, of time, labor, genius, and even life. It was a national tithe of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. It required humility, hierarchy, structure, labor, and submission to greater goods. In short, it mirrored the structure of the cosmos itself, ordered, not chaotic, hierarchical, not anarchic. What if we lived like that again? What if we raised our children not on TikTok nihilism, but on tales of true greatness, of men who trained, prayed, labored, studied, leapt beyond the stars? What if we built schools that taught Genesis before gender theory, that formed souls before coding classes? What if, like Aldrin, we consecrated every act of human triumph with the Eucharist? The fathers of the Church often spoke of the cosmic liturgy, the idea that the entire universe is a temple, that man is its priest. Maximus the Confessor wrote, man is the microcosm, the one who unites heaven and earth through his rational soul and his physical body. The moon landing, then, becomes a sort of priestly act, man lifting up creation in wonder, study, prayer. Aldrin's lunar communion was not just ritual, it was cosmic liturgy. It proclaimed to the heavens that Christ is Lord even of the moon. It's no accident that when man first left Earth's atmosphere, he looked back in silence at the pale blue dot and was humbled. That's the beginning of wisdom. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament proclaims the work of his hands. Psalm 19:1. The moon, once a symbol of myth, madness, and paganism, became, on July the 20th, 1969, a signpost toward the Creator. You and I must cast off the false dichotomies of our age. Progress versus religion, science versus faith, individual versus society. These are all illusions. Benedict XVI reminded the world, faith purifies reason and allows it to be truly human. The moon landing is proof. It was the fruit of faith, family, education, discipline, and shared vision. It did not arise from cynicism or endless revolution. It arose from covenantal collaboration. And if you and I want to flourish again, we must return to the church, to the altar, and to build anew. The next leap for mankind shouldn't merely be to Mars, but maybe to transcendent meaning. The answer is clear, the call is urgent, we were made for the stars. But only when we kneel before the Lord of Heaven will we walk rightly among them. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus Peter. Ave Maria Radio spearheads the proclamation of the gospel into all areas of society and culture. And so we want to invite you to think about what Catholic radio means for you. Because our towers and our equipment need updating. And we want to ask you to think about the impact of Catholic radio and how your donations can help continue the propagation of the gospel for the salvation of souls to all who hear it. Thank you for joining us on this wondrous mission.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. One doctrinal position separating the fractured body of Christ on earth is the issue of original sin. Many non-Catholics argue that Adam and Eve's sin brought death into the world, but it didn't pass anything else on to future generations. Catholics hold on to the perennial biblical truth and the truth of the deposit of faith, that Adam passed on a corrupted human nature. Our hearts are stony and selfish instead of receiving and living of supernatural love in life. Luke Lancaster looks to Scripture and tradition to see the evidence for the Catholic point of view. Luke is a cradle Catholic. He is working on his MA in theology at the Augustine Institute right now and is interested in the work of biblical apologetics. Luke, great to speak with you again. How are you?
I'm doing great, my old college friend. How's it going, Marcus?
It's going really well. It's always great to connect with you, and I really like this piece. So before we talk about the evidence that you've brought up, I think it's really important that we help enlighten our listeners about how the notion of original sin is held outside of the Catholic Church.
Yes, so you have different non-Catholics like Dr. Michael Heiser, who was one scholar who I clearly heard him say this. There'll be other evangelical scholars that would say that Adam's sin was a sin that only involved death for him, and then the rest of us who have been born since Adam simply are just going to die one day. Like, that's the only effect of Adam's sin. Some of our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters would hold that position as well. But Catholics, of course, are going to say that there's a little more to this picture, that Adam has a stony heart that is transmitted to all of us, and that can be seen even from children and their desire to resist authority and the desire to to stick to whatever they want to do and throw a fit if it's not going their way. It's just kind of like all of us have a stony heart.
Right, and so we call that the concupiscible nature, that we inherit this. And like you mentioned, if we are at least perceptive, we can see this from the level of children, that we tend towards those things that are self-centered, self-serving, and frankly, self-destructive if not corrected in virtue.
Mm-hmm.
So from there then, tell us about where we find original sin.
Yeah, I think the clearest example for myself and the way that my mind works when I'm reading the book of Genesis, it's clear that God tells Adam that if he eats of the one tree, of everything possibly fathomable, gives him this extremely minor thing, like only one thing. You just got to avoid one thing. It's like being given the keys to the New York City, as my professor said, and then except on 59th Street on the third floor of this one apartment building, could you leave that light on in that one apartment building? And immediately, our hearts just want to say, no, it's all mine, And so Adam, unfortunately, goes and eats of the forbidden fruit, but God tells him that he's going to die as soon as he eats it. It's immediately. This is going to happen to you. You're going to die. But, of course, we see that Adam does not die. He sins and then is taken out of the garden and proceeds to have children. So Adam does not die that day. So either God was a liar, or when God speaks of death to Adam, there is some type of death to him that is not purely physical corruption, but maybe even a spiritual death. And that's the way that the tradition of the church has looked at that there is a spiritual death that takes place. And also just from a location standpoint, Adam sins and is taken out of the Garden of Eden. If the Garden of Eden is seen as communion with God, as an image of heaven, where God is literally walking around through the Garden of Eden, it literally says that in Genesis, then Adam is not in communion with God. And every single child he has is outside of communion with God.
Right.
So I think that's an easy one when it comes to thinking of this doctrine. The book of Genesis, I think, is a very impressive text. There are other texts that you can look at, like Psalm 51 or Romans chapter 5, but I think Genesis is the easiest.
Now, flowing from your argument from Genesis, which I believe is completely spot on, how would those who deny the reality of original sin as an inherited, corrupted reality in the human nature, how would they reconcile this reading with their worldview?
I believe I've heard attempts to explain what died exactly. Maybe they would try to say it wasn't immediate and that it is just a reference to physical death. Some other examples, I would have to look a little more in depth. That's not readily coming to mind.
Mm-hmm. So let's go on to deepening then of the understanding of spiritual death, that original sin caused an immediate kind of death in the human nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it means that there is no spiritual life within you. I think Trent Horn gave this example of original sin is like a hole, like it's more of a thing that is missing. So there is this emptiness within us, and we recognize that there's an emptiness when we see Christ. We look at Jesus and we see he's perfect. I mean, he's being crucified and tortured, and he's going to be, like the book of Hebrews says, he was screaming, right? He's in agony on the cross, and what does he do? He forgives his enemies. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That is not a human reaction, right? He has some type of life within him that is beyond our life, that there's something golden and shining and radiant about his life that isn't from our lives. And so when we see that, we recognize, okay, there's an emptiness in humanity, and Jesus is trying to give us that heart. He's trying to come from the inside and fill us with the life that he himself has. So the way that he thinks, the way that he views things, the way that he speaks, the way that he acts, these are the things he tries to communicate to us. And so original sin is corrected by Jesus' life, which is given to us at baptism. And you can see this throughout the tradition of the church, which is really impressive. I was reviewing the article today. I wrote it, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, and wow! I mean, just the breadth of tradition. And the Shepherd of Hermas says that's the first century. I mean, it's saying before a man bears the name of the Son of God, he is dead. Right? That's the first century Christian belief. Or Irenaeus of Lyon always talks about in his Against Heresies, again, this time the second century, so 100s AD, talks about just the life being lost with Adam's disobedience. Right? So there's this invisible aspect. And then Pope John Paul II, he writes a whole catechesis on original sin. He cites the Council of Trent, which speaks of the death of the soul, and he cites Romans chapter 5. And instead of really honing in on Romans 5:12, which is typically the text used for original sin, I think he does a really impressive job of honing in on just the verses after that, where it says Romans 5, verses 18 through 19, which speaks of how every man is made a sinner and is labeled as condemned. Right, and that's the only way that logic makes sense is if we are connected to Adam in a very radical way, that he is our representative and somehow collectively represents us, and that we are in him. When Adam becomes divorced from God, right, he exits the Garden of Eden, so all of us are divorced. This is the great divorce.
It truly is, and this is what C.S. Lewis was trying to get at with that title. And so, we're running out of time, but to present, therefore, the good news of the gospel, especially in the language of the Catechism, what can we know about original sin and salvation in Christ? Yes,
I think Brant Petrie and Michael Barber and John Kincaid wrote this book, Paul, a New Covenant Jew, and they really hone in on emphasizing that justification is a cardiac righteousness, that your heart is changed from the inside, and that's why we can see saints now, like, I don't know, St. Francis of Assisi, who leaves everything, like his incredibly rich and comfortable lifestyle, to go and live in a leper colony with all of his, wonderful masks and gloves and disinfectant spray. That would have been existing, in the 1200s, and being facetious, of course. It didn't take place, right? Saints like that, or Mother Teresa. We can go on.
Right. Luke, thank you very much for making the time to speak with us.
Got it.
My guest has been Luke Lancaster, cradle Catholic from Florida, who is an apologist today, and he just spoke with us about how Catholics and the Catholic doctrine about original sin is in fact the accurate one. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
You like pizza? Me too. And for that, we can thank our friend Tom Monahan. First, he starts with $900 and opens one pizza shop. Then it's worldwide, thousands of shops. But all this was just a warm-up for his greatest achievement yet. He built a university.
God inspired Tom to build up generations of men and women who have a hunger to reach the world for Christ. This place is Ave Maria University.
Visit avemaria.edu to see what's next.
St. Joseph's Helpers provides minor home repairs free of charge to those most in need in our community, especially veterans and the elderly. Your business can help by donating funds, construction materials, and equipment, or even planning a volunteer workday for your staff. To schedule a conversation on ways your business can partner with St. Joseph's Helpers, visit sjhelpers.org today. St. Joseph's Helpers, giving dignity, spreading hope.
Honey, did you ever call Mighty Dog Roofing of Ann Arbor for that free roof inspection?
I knew I forgot something.
Roof leaks can cause mold buildup or even roof collapse. Protect your family today by calling local Catholics Dan and Mary Flanagan at Mighty Dog Roofing for a free inspection of your roof, siding, or windows. Mighty Dog Roofing, 734-224-4916. That's 734-224-4916. Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Being pro-life usually is associated with living a life of faith. And the reasons for this are not solely doctrinal, but are also what one might call experiential. Even with the marvels of modern ultrasound, the unborn child cannot be directly seen or touched. And yet, based on various signs and wonders, the pro-life person affirms and loves this hidden, shadowy reality. While the immediate reality is not there, still one who is awake to signs of the child's presence discards unbelief and believes. The life of faith requires a similar habit of being, opening oneself to the signs and wonders surrounding us every day, and from these signs and wonders to affirm that He is, just as the unborn child cries to us, I am. GuadalupeWorkers.org.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866 Ave Maria or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. When we think about the reality of nature, and I'm not just talking about human nature, I'm talking about everything as it exists as created by God, we also therefore have to think about particular realities of causality and therefore the final end, the teleology of a thing. So when you hear the word telos, which undoubtedly many of you have, we are looking at the final cause of all things, the purpose or the goal towards which a thing is directed. Its entire existence and creation hinges upon its final cause. Joining me to have a conversation about this is John O'Callaghan. John has penned this article, Teleology, What Is It Good For? John is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Notre Dame and a permanent member of the Pontifical Academy of St. Thomas Aquinas. John, it's great to speak with you. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm really glad to have you on. I think this is a really important question, and therefore I start touching on the reality of causes. If you could, for the sake of our listeners, present the reality of the four causes as a primer for the rest of our conversation.
Oh my! Usually in my classes, this could take 2 weeks, but I'll try briefly. So Aristotle, and Thomas takes these up into his own thought, Aristotle identifies 4 different aspects of reality that he ends up calling causes. And those are form and matter, end and efficient cause. So very briefly, the form of something is what you're describing when you say what it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you think about a tree and you think about a pig, both of them are made of the same stuff, roughly, organic matter. But they have a different kind of intelligibility. And you describe the form of the oak tree, for instance, when you say how it is that organic matter is organized in such a way that it produces the sorts of manifest activities that oak trees engage in. And then, of course, you say something differently when you're describing a pig. Same rough organic matter, but nonetheless, when you say what it is and how it is organized and how it manifests itself in the ways in which it does, you're saying what the form of the thing is. Efficient cause would be when typically something acts upon another thing and acts in a way that is distinctive of the agent. It changes a patient in some form or another. A pitcher throws a baseball and imposes a kind of order on it as it crosses home plate. Well, the pitcher is the efficient cause of that path and the strike or the foul or whatever it is. Well, maybe not the foul, but the strike. And the sort of strike would be what Aristotle would call the final cause. Why did the efficient cause throw the ball in the way in which he did in an effort to strike out the batter? So that's the goal or end. So form, matter. The matter is what the thing is made of. Mm-hmm. The form, matter, efficient cause and final cause, or telos in Greek, which is where we get the word teleology.
Right.
So telos in Greek just means end. Not the end of the time, but the goal. What's the point of what you're doing?
Right. Now,
how's that?
Oh, that was very good. I had a feeling you were going to ask me how that was. No, that was
well, you know,
that was very good, and
I've tried it.
I love the baseball analogy, and I can also acknowledge that it was a difficult task, considering, like you said, you spent 2 weeks with your students on this, and this raises particular questions. Just knowing all this raises particular questions about how we think today, with especially post-Enlightenment empiricism, scientism. We see figures like Hume and Immanuel Kant, and even just Darwinian evolution, completely do away with the question of a telos, a teleology to everything that exists. Tell us about that in general, and then specifically why that's detrimental.
Well, what happens in the modern period, and this is a great oversimplification, but what happens is you start to get increasing skepticism about the ability to know what things are in terms of that idea of form or nature. The nature, as Aristotle understood it, and again Thomas adopts this, is the kind of intrinsic principle in a thing, particularly a living thing, from which it acts to achieve a goal. And what you get is, given the rise of empiricism, as you mentioned, a kind of skepticism of the ability to actually understand what that nature is for the things we see in the world. And the nature of science kind of changes at the same time to be a kind of desire to control the world and to be able to predict what's going to happen. Galileo wanted to be able to more accurately put cannonballs inside the fort rather than over the fort. And so you kind of describe that all mathematically, but you don't kind of get at the nature of things. And so what you see in modern science is a development whereby, given the new goals of modern science, you really don't care what the nature of the thing is, so long as you can predict what will happen, because the prediction gives you control and gives you power. And that's one way of understanding the implications. I mean, modern science is a wonderful, wonderful achievement of human kind and human nature in its understanding of the world, but it's qualified in the sense that, yes, and then it's put to some quite bad uses. I was a physics major in college and just was overawed and stunned by what physics tells us about the world. But it's true that, say, for instance, physics could produce nuclear reactors that we're turning back to now culturally because of all the concerns about carbon and stuff like that. But it also produced the atomic bomb. And science has been involved in the improvement of weapons of war from the very beginning. So, this inability to understand that things have natures, and that knowing those natures helps us to understand their goals, well, that becomes secondary to this idea of having power and control. And, I was listening to the speakers before I came on, and, power is a good thing, but also power and the desire to be powerful and to control is also at the root of original sin.
Yes.
And not see ourselves as creatures who we don't choose to be human. To take that particular example, I tell my students there are two things in life you don't get to decide. One is being born human, and two is what the goal of being human is. You get to decide how you get from being human to that goal, but you don't get to decide that. And the desire to decide that is about power, and I think that's the root of original sin, to decide what we are and not see what we are as the gift from God.
I'm really glad that you paved the path for that conversation, because one of the things that we talk about on this program, too, is Catholics have to regain a holistic, transcendent worldview, basically a godly worldview. Would you please comment on why, and like Ratzinger mentioned, that if we don't have a teleological worldview, then even the way we inquire truth and therefore the sciences becomes impoverished and ultimately destructive?
Yeah, so one of the results of that kind of move in modern thought, and you had mentioned Immanuel Kant, is you end up with this dichotomy that seems to be where the two parts of it are at odds with one another, and that is, on the one hand, we recognize that as animals, for instance, we're part of nature. But then on the other hand, we acknowledge that we have reason. And so reason and nature, and Kant sort of talked about this at length, reason and nature seem to be at odds in certain ways.
So that's a good place to pause, John. We're continuing on the other side of the break with Dr. John O'Callaghan, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame, about teleology, our final end and what that means. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
No one should ever have to choose between feeding their family and keeping their heat on. Impossible questions like rent or diapers demand answers every day, likely in your very own neighborhood. But you can help. Hope Clinic partners with you to provide free medical, dental, food, and behavioral health care, all in Jesus' name. While others face impossible choices, your choice is an easy one. Partner with Hope Clinic today. Find out how at www.thehopeclinic.org.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popchak.
When kids get angry, a lot of parents just want to shut it down. Remember, though, that anger is a natural response to a perceived offense or need. Instead of just shutting down our kids' outbursts, it's better to help them learn to express their anger in ways that are appropriate, proportionate, and productive. Start by acknowledging and empathizing with their anger. Let them know you're happy to listen if they can express themselves appropriately. If they can't, give them some time to cool off, and when they're ready, offer to help them figure out a way to say their piece peacefully. Remember, it's not always wrong to feel angry. As parents, it's our job to help our kids harness the power of their anger for good. You can learn more about helping kids manage anger in our books, Parenting Your Kids with Grace and Parenting Your Teens and Tweens with Grace, or visit CatholicCounselors.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
Growing up, I vowed never to turn into my mother. She was tough. She yelled at us. She made us go to church and clean our rooms. Can you believe it? Well, as a mom, I found myself yelling, do your homework, eat your dinner, turn off that cell phone. For me, it was turn off the TV, not TikTok, but you get it. I didn't like the rules, but I knew God expected me to obey my parents. And it's not because he wants to dampen our fun. He knows that a parent's love means keeping kids safe and grounded in faith. I grew up in a family devoted to Mother Mary, but only when I became a mother myself did I understand her love for her child. I can't imagine her deep pain watching Jesus being persecuted and crucified. Yes, being a mom is my greatest joy. A child is the greatest gift. Being a parent is the most challenging job. God gave us Mother Mary and her beloved Son, Jesus, to show us what a mother's love is all about. This has been a Christ-Centered Communication Message. I'm Vanessa Denha-Garmo, a communications evangelist and host of Epiphany.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus Peter. Ave Maria Radio spearheads the proclamation of the gospel into all areas of society and culture. And so we want to invite you to think about what Catholic radio means for you. Because our towers and our equipment need updating. And we want to ask you to think about the impact of Catholic radio and how your donations can help continue the propagation of the gospel for the salvation of souls to all who hear it. Thank you for joining us on this wondrous mission.
Hi, I'm Father Chris Alar of the Marian Fathers of the Immaculate Conception. My new book, Understanding the Sacraments, unpacks the extraordinary gifts unique to the Catholic Church. Ever wonder why we baptize infants? Is confession in the Bible? And must wives be subordinate to their husbands? The answers to these more hot-button questions about the sacraments are on sale now from Marian Press at shopmercy.org. God bless you.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Pete. I'm speaking with Dr. John O'Callaghan, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame. We are talking about this big question, teleology. It simply means the end, the purpose for which a thing is made. John, we had gotten cut off at the break. I want you to finish your thought about you were just painting us that picture about the conflict that exists in understanding teleology today.
Yeah, I was just thinking that may be the first time in history that Immanuel Kant was a cliffhanger. So the point was that you see a kind of dichotomy that arises in culture between nature and reason and the identification of ourselves as rational beings, and in many ways apart from nature, apart from the world in which we find ourselves embedded and subject to. You know, I obey the universal law of gravitation. But then, so it's not like I'm not part of nature as a bodily thing, but you see this kind of tearing apart and a rift. Walker Percy, I think, called it the San Andreas fault in human nature, characteristic of modern thought, where what's important for me is that I'm a rational being above and apart from nature. And that's not really what we are. We are, in fact, if you look at Genesis, created as part and parcel of the natural world. We're given dominion, but of course dominion doesn't mean, master-slave relationship to nature. Right. I like to say to my students, we tend to think of ourselves as other than or differing from the animals. And I say to them, no, what we do is we differ as an animal, which sees us as embedded in this world with a concern for this world, most importantly for one another, but then also for the other things in the world. And so that's sort of the vision that you get in someone like Aquinas, whom I work on, is of a rational animal created by God for certain purposes in the world and a destiny beyond the world in God. And all of that is about teleology.
Right.
I was born a certain kind of being with certain goals that fit together to a final goal, as you were saying.
As a person who loves reading, essentially quantum mechanics, but I've got a special interest in just reading about string theory. It's very clear that empiricist worldview makes it such that one simply cannot entertain the idea of a transcendent mind behind this unifying theory, and you really see after some point the circular futility of that enterprise.
Oh yeah, the difficulty with empiricism is not where it starts, and that is with our knowledge of the world gained through the senses. But empiricism isn't necessary for scientific endeavor. Empiricism is a philosophical position taken about scientific endeavor. Right. And involving the kind of denial that we can get beyond the initial experiences of the senses. All we can do is generalize about them. There's no way of knowing anything behind them. Rather than, say, thinking of the way in which we experience the things around us is a route into the manifestation of what that thing is, right? I mean, I have to listen to my wife. But what my wife says to me and the way my wife acts towards me is a manifestation of who she is.
Right.
If I were an empiricist about that, right, I would be a constant skeptic about whether or not she loves me.
That's right. That's
and there
right.
Is that. I mean, that's in a sense that's what empiricism leads to, is a constant skepticism that there is a kind of intelligibility that is giving rise to these manifestations. And so you don't get beyond that. And it just makes for a fairly, banal view of the world around us.
It truly does.
I think you mentioned I forget the quote you had at one point during the show, but, Gerard Manley Hopkins, God's grandeur. The world will shake out like shook foil. The glory of the Lord. I mean, it's just, the world is a way that God speaks to us because God has created it with the intelligibility it has. And so while you don't have to invoke God while you're doing quantum mechanics or while you're doing Big Bang Theory, from the perspective of faith, and you think about your quote from Benedict about purifying, from the perspective of faith, and I think this is what I loved so much when I was doing physics, was not that I was invoking God to move, the ball across the pool table, but that my understanding of that and my understanding of what the world was like that I was learning, I could see from the perspective of faith as another way in which God is speaking to me.
Right.
With the beauty of this and the beauty of the intelligibility that's a created intelligibility.
You bring up a really crucial point, therefore, about how the atheistic empiricist has to, by means of his own folly, divinize something, and he winds up divinizing the science that he employs. You see this in Neil deGrasse Tyson. I mean, the man speaks about the sun the way Christians speak about God.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's without judging my neighbor with him, but that's a kind of idolatry because it displaces the creature, or it displaces God for the creature and elevates the creature to the God who is worshipped, rather than a means to worshiping the God who created it. Right. I mean, the sun, again, nuclear physics, which powers the sun, is just extraordinary. The guy I worked for in college was a nuclear solar physicist, and it was just wonderful to work for that guy. And he was no atheist, by the way, but you think, and who created this? St. Augustine, in one of his sermons, says, I look at the world and I see these beautiful things, and they all speak their beauty, and so on and so on. And I see the beautiful stars and the beautiful trees and beautiful flowers. And yes, they are beautiful, but they say to me, yes, we are beautiful, but how much more beautiful He who made us.
Right.
So they speak of the glory of God themselves, if you acknowledge their intelligibility. And that's a difficulty with the philosophical position of empiricism, is it cuts off the ability of the things to speak of their intelligibility. And in doing that, it cuts off the ability of a larger epistemic perspective that allows God to speak through those things.
Now, one of the things we can acknowledge by virtue of what you've just said is the epistemology of the common man today is so steeped in this empiricist worldview that all we are obsessed about is this mechanistic, scientific inquiry. I must know with as much detail as possible how this thing mechanistically works, and therefore I can understand the universe. But what you're positing here is having the theological worldview liberates us from even that.
Yes. I mean, in many ways, if you remember in Plato's allegory of the cave, they were always looking at the shadows cast by the realities and never seeing the realities. And so I think one of the difficulties we have in modern culture is one, misunderstanding of the nature of science,
right,
driven by philosophical positions, and two, just the distraction of appearance, right? I mean, empiricism is about appearances, but look at the appearances we obsess ourselves with, right? Social media, just silly movies. I love movies, right? But I mean, most movies being made today are just silly movies.
Yeah.
Silly television shows. I mean, there were great television shows when I was a kid. I probably watched too much television, but what you see now, especially in the social media and television and movies, just comes nowhere near the depth of thought and intelligibility that you did see in movies and television, right? And I'm not trying to be nostalgic there, but everything is fleeting. Everything is instantaneous. Nothing really requires you to think, and you can just play with the appearances, and you don't ask a question that drives you past the appearances to whatever it is that's manifesting it. And if you look and see what is manifesting those appearances, it's not a pretty sight. Yeah. You know, I just read this thing in, I think, the Wall Street Journal over the weekend about this really sad case of someone with autism being misled by ChatGPT, I think it was. I hope I got that right so I don't get sued. But and it was just tragic, especially if you've had anybody with mental illness in your life, that he couldn't get past the appearance of praise from this artificial thing. And you look back behind it and you say, what's the point of ChatGPT and complimenting this fellow the way it was? Well, that's how they bring people in. That's the revenue stream. So it goes back to Plato. We got to get past the appearances to the realities that give rise to the appearances, and make judgments about those things.
So we have about 1 minute, and let's be honest, your life's trajectory is probably irrational to the average person steeped in scientism, right? You went from being a physicist to a philosopher. But I want to ask you to say a word of encouragement and exhortation to all of our listeners that this is the path to pursue the transcendent.
What this is the path? You mean science, or just generally?
Just generally pursuing philosophy, understanding our teleology, and therefore not being scientistic.
Yeah. I mean, the way to think about that is the reflective mode of thinking, whether it's in philosophy or theology, or preferably both, is to actually ask about causes, and intelligibility, and the really real, and to be able to distinguish between the manifestation of the real thing and the real thing, and to see that in a larger perspective as God speaking to us in order that we can complete what God wanted for us.
So we have to stop there, John. My guest has been John Callahan, and we've been talking about the reality of teleology. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.